welcome to our session on branding for TPOs. I'm pleased to have with me today an illustrious speaker and very distinguished panelist. Let me introduce you to all of them. I start with Mr. Alvaro Silva-Santisteban, Director of Trade and Investment Office of Peru, who is on my extreme left, and I have Mr. Mohammed Kamali, Director of the Export Markets Development of Dubai Exports. I have Mr. Karl Hartleb, Deputy Director General of Advantage Austria, and Helen Rankin, the Business Development Manager of TPO. Without further ado, I will hand over the floor to Alvaro, who will share his perspective on how Peru has been able to brand itself to the world using a very special and creative way. Alvaro.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all. First of all, I'd like to thank Dubai Exports and TIC for giving me the pleasure to speak about something that fascinates me and keeps on fascinating me, which is Peru, my country, and today your country as well. And something that really passions me as well, which is communications and the process of branding. So before we go into details in terms of how the Peruvian experience became upon and how the brand of Peru was conceived, I want to give you just a very small thought, and please don't get me wrong, because this by no means has to do with product branding. We have to be very careful in terms of making the distinction between what a country brand is and what a product brand is. But just to give you an idea and to give you a thought in terms of what branding represents worldwide and now how branding is a trend, I'll just shoot up a couple of names. You have Nike, Adidas, McDonald's, Levi's, MasterCard or Visa for that chance, Warner Brothers, FedEx, Rolex. Some brands or some well-known products that you have in the market. And then on the other hand, I have Apple, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, IBM, General Electric, McDonald's, Intel, Samsung, and Louis Vuitton. So you might be asking what's the difference between the first line of products that I gave you and the second line of products that I just gave you. The big difference between them is that the first ones have become iconic logos. The second slot that I gave you have become the most valuable brands. Why am I making this distinction? Because a logo, or better said a brand, is much more than a logo. A logo is something that will stick, a brand is something that has essence. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because in our case, in the case of Peru, our logo has become the brand and the brand has become the logo. So before we go into sharing the experience, I would just like to share with you a corporate video in terms of what Peru stands for today, or better said in 2013. And I'll just give you an updated figures in terms of the reality of Peru. Please, if we can have the first video. I'll get back into the second and the reason why I showed this video. But let's go into what branding represents. When they told me that I needed to speak about country branding, the first thought that came to my mind was going back until 1999 to what, for my view, was the first country branding experience that I have ever heard. And I remember quite frankly when this happened, because I was actually in Paris waiting for the change of the millennium. And I was listening to the news, and then this spot on CNN came along, and it was Malaysia truly Asia. Today, this morning, while I was getting ready to come to speak to you, I was watching CNN, and the first thing that I heard was Malaysia truly Asia. So since 1999 till date, Malaysia truly Asia is still branded exactly the same. This, in communications, is an essence. Why? Because it's consistency and coherence. They've kept over the years exactly the same logo. Although their brand has been tailored for tourism, we're still speaking about a branded country that has made very good success. 4 years after, we had incredible India. Also, another very good example in terms of how countries have branded themselves. Years after, in 2000, you had South Africa. South Africa branded itself not because they needed or wanted a brand, but better said, because they needed to change the perception that South Africa had. It was not the same case for Malaysia. It was probably not the same case for India. And later, more than a brand, I would say it's a concept. It's something that one of my fellow panelists is going to be explaining. Is Tuhon, which in Korean embraces a lot of different factors that have made them be successful as well, and this is how Korea is now identifying themselves. Now, going back to the video, why a Peru brand? And this is the reason why we have a Peru brand. I would say that one of the first reasons is because it was possible. Why was it possible? 25 years ago, if Peru wanted to brand themselves, I would say, this is really not going to happen. You know, the people just lost it, they're speaking about whatever. Why? Because we had too many internal problems that needed to be solved. We had a bad perception abroad. Today, as you have seen on the video, that is a completely different story. That's the reason why I want to show the video, because we created a brand. Peru brands itself internationally because it's possible, because we can. They always ask me what has been the secret of success in terms of becoming what Peru is today. And to my view, one of the main reasons is because the economic stability that we have gained for the past years has been completely independently run from the political perspective that the government might have. So for the past 15 years, Peru has been growing over 6% every year. For the past 15 years, Peru has signed different free trade agreements, which has made us to have our trade, 94% of it under free trade agreements. And in 2009, when we saw that Peru was a different country and it was a thriving nation that was internationalized already and it was recognized, we decided to create a brand. The second reason is because it was necessary. Peru is a 30 million people country. 60% of our territory is the jungle. Actually, the Amazon jungle of the Amazon River starts in Peru. 13% of the lungs of the world belong to Peru. Then we have the Andes, the highest stretched mountains that you would find in Latin America. And then you have the coast. I'm putting you into context because we have 3 different big personalities that differ from each other. And you have a businessman that could be up on the high Andes. You can have a businessman that is down on the south of the jungle, and you can have a businessman that is up on the north, on the other side of the country. So for us, it was necessary to unite all these businessmen, to unite the Peruvians, to unite our population under one umbrella. Under one umbrella that would be used as a platform, that would be used as an essence, that would be used as an emotion to communicate what Peru is about. And it would give you the opportunity for those businessmen or for those Peruvians to identify with somebody. The third reason, to my view, is because it was relevant. Why was it relevant? Because we compete internationally, because we're talking about a globalized world. And if those small businessmen or those Peruvians that didn't have this unity in order to communicate what Peru stands about or what it stands for, then that platform and that essence or or that value-added champagne that they needed was not given to them. So it was relevant for us to have a brand. In oversell, the brand gave us a statistic value proposition. For us, the brand or the logo or the brand, which in our case is the same, is just a distinctive value proposition that gave us one common message, and then it helped us put ourselves under one single unity abroad in the context. The world context, that was another reason why we also created a brand, because now it's fashion that countries brand themselves. These are just some examples. Not all of them have the country and the logo as a brand. Many of them have a slogan. In our case, it's not the same. In our case, and you will see why, Peru stands on its own. What was our context, and what were the reasons, and what were the basis, or the essence that gave us the possibility of creating a brand? Well, we have one of the wonders of the world, Machu Picchu. As I was saying, 96% of our trade is already under free trade agreements. Our gastronomy. I'm going to make a very small point on this because I was just speaking actually with somebody about it. When I was a kid, as well as I was saying that 25 years ago or more, it was impossible for us to think about a brand. Everybody wanted to be a football player. Today in Peru, everybody wants to be a chef. Peru currently holds the largest chefs-to-be population in the world. Over 120,000 students want to be now chefs. Gastronomy for us has become a symbol and has become part of the essence of the brand that we communicate. When I first arrived into the UAE, this was in 2011, there were 0 Peruvian restaurants. By the end of this year, we're going to be having 3 Peruvian restaurants, and by the end of next year, we're going to be having 6 Peruvian restaurants. So the gastronomy, the Peruvian gastronomy is, as our brand, conquering the world. Because we were recognized in the subject art. Actually, the person that you see there receiving the prize was even nominated for the Oscars for the best foreign film. Something that 25 years ago would have not happened. Because we received a Nobel Prize. Because the Amazon River is part of humanity. So as I was saying, our context and the world context needed for us to create a brand. What was the perspective? Because we had the essence, we had the basics. We could, for us it was necessary and it was relevant. But the perspective that we wanted to portray in our brand was one that was going to be world interconnected. And it was a brand that would show a decentralized economy, and it was a brand that it was going to be showing a thriving and educated nation. What was the process? I'm going to make a stop here as well, because you're going to be seeing that my presentation changes colors. Why does it change colors? Because our brand and because our country is so multifaceted that our brand is also incorporated in different colors. We even created our own font, the font that you're seeing that is called BRIC Peru. So our branding was not just a logo, it was a whole package. Well, we first chose the agency, then we studied what Peru was about in the world's eyes. Perception in terms of the international world, performance of the country brand index. We interviewed 3,000 tourisms, and we created a panel of 47 experts that came from all walks and abouts. It was not just about Peru, it was about everybody contributing to the same in terms of what Peru was. The competition, we studied everybody. We even studied the brand of Dubai, we studied the brand of Oman. We even studied the brand of Qatar 2022 in terms of how they were going to be portraying themselves. We audited our communication material. It was very peculiar, you know. Every agency in Peru wanted to have their own logo, and every agency wanted to have their own slogan, and everybody wanted to communicate a different message. So investment was communicating something, tourism was communicating another thing, trade was communicating something different, our own ministries were communicating something different. So we did a big search in terms of the audit, in terms of what the brand was. And then we validated the brand, inside and outside. Once the brand was selected, we traveled all over around Peru. And we asked them, is this something that you identify yourself with? Is this something that you would be encouraged to use? Is this something that you believe that will give you an added value? We also did it internationally. We went to New York, we went to Austria, we came to Dubai. We asked the people, do you believe that's something that will represent Peru? So the process was a big process for us. What was the need, and what was that what we were aiming for? Well, we wanted to globalize within one brand, trade, tourism, and investment. We couldn't be like Malaysia, that we only needed to promote tourism. And we couldn't be like India in only promoting only one aspect. We needed to promote all 3 aspects under one. We've been talking about how the TPOs help promote and how the TPOs give you that platform to be able to reach out to different markets. In our case, our brand gives you that platform and gives you that essence and gives you that feeling and that sentiment to be able to do so in all aspects. Why? Because we needed to increase our exports, because we needed to receive more tourism, and because we needed to attract more investments into the country. The result is something that I'm going to be showing, and if we can have please the second video. Yes, we do say that there's a clue for everyone. What the result for us was a soul-searching experience, or what at least I call a soul-searching experience, because we went very deep into our roots, we went very deep into our essences. Every stakeholder rose the same question. Is there any past, present, or forward-thinking message, symbol, or element that can identify us? Is it an object? Is it an animal? Is it a product? At the end of the day, after the soul-searching experience, we discovered that at the end of the day, our own name of the country was the essence of the brand. In 4 very simple terms. Why? Because it's short and concise, it's only 4 words, so it sticks. Like for example, Intel or HP. Very concise and small messages, because it has a musical sound to it, because in almost every language of the world is pronounced exactly the same, and because it has a distinctive hyphen that brings a difference into the brand. However, we still needed to take into consideration all our roots. This shape that you're looking at can be identified as well with the first B of our brand. This actually is one of the first civilizations of the world. We took that into consideration. We went into Mochica, very craftsman experts. We looked at the Nazca lines. Everybody asks me, what are the Nazca lines? The Nazca lines are lines that are in the middle of the desert that although we cover them with sand every day, next morning they're still there. You walk through the desert and you won't feel the dent. It's like if you're walking on the plain land. You can only see them out from the sky. How did they come into about? Well, we had a German archaeologist that had studied for over 70 years and she didn't come up with the answer. But still, something that we incorporated into our brand. We even went into the Incas, one of the only very few empires that came into the world. We considered everything. We looked at every essence that really brought through into our essence of the brand. However, our inspiration and our ancestral background needed a forward-thinking identity. And that's why we came with, we came with the logo that you saw. Why the fingertip? Because it's also something that people relate to the first beat. What we try to say, or what we like to say, is that if you relate to it, it's because either Peru has left a fingerprint in you, or better said, that Peru is at your fingertips. It's up to you to choose. The at also relates to the first beat. You can say that Peru is at your doorsteps, or better said, that you are at Peru. It's up to you as well to choose. At the end of the day, what was the result in terms of numbers? 78% of the country approved the brand. 85% of it mentioned that it was important to have a brand. But the most important thing and the most important result in terms of our soul-searching experience was that every product or every service or every platform that would use the brand would have 98% of reception. So all the products that would be with the brand would have 98% more probabilities of being bought than the ones that didn't have the brand. How do we communicate our brand? We had two very good experiences. As I was mentioning at the beginning, Peru is very big. We have different types of walks and abouts. We have different stereotypes. So we did as well a soul searching experience inside before we took it outside. The video that you're going to be seeing, although it's in Spanish and it's very long, we're going to cut it short. It's subtitled in English. But the idea was, what was the most remote, different type of Peruvian that you might be able to find? Believe it or not, we found a very small town, no more than 600 inhabitants, in the middle of Nebraska, the United States. So what we did is we took all our best representatives to the middle of Nebraska in the United States, and we showed them what being Peruvians is all about. If we can have the third video, please.
Todo peruano, por el solo hecho de ser peruano, tiene derecho a gozar de lo maravilloso que es ser peruano. Perú, Nebraska, 569 habitantes, un grifo, un restaurante, una avenida, un banco, un museo, una estación de tren que, bueno, ahora sirve para otros fines, su escuela, su tanque de agua, su alcaldía y un sheriff cuyo último trabajo fue separar a un perro de un gato en 1998. Perú, Nebraska, tiene un problema. Son peruanos, pero no saben qué significa serlo.
Listo, muchachos, Diego. Vamos, Cristian. Vamos, dale.
Right now, the 18th chef in the world. Cristian Bravo, who was here in the wine in 1911 for Peru 2 times in a row. The person who won the Burning Air in the film. The best actor right now, part of our musicians. Literally, we overtook Peru, Nebraska.
Nuestra misión, ser embajadores de nuestro país y leerles sus derechos como peruanos.
Ustedes son de Perú. Tienen derecho a comer rico. Les repito, ustedes son de Perú. Anticucho, ceviche, papa rellena.
¿Quieres probar? You can try it. What you call this?
Chicha morada.
Huancaína, aceituna,
What is that?
That's ocopa.
Copa.
You want to know a secret?
The secret.
I don't eat fish.
¿Te gusta? ¿Mira aquí?
propio auto.
He is world champion of surfing, and that's why he's trying to imitate that he will be surfing.
Tienen derecho a surfear. Tienen derecho a poner buenas olas. Tienen derecho a poner la izquierda más larga del mundo.
He says the world champion of surfing.
Ustedes tienen derecho a meterse unos tubazos.
Ajá, Lindywood. Hola, buenas. A ver, documentos. No sabemos que está comiendo su dona. Nena, yo quiero acá ofrecerle una igualita, con huequito también, pero este se llama picarón.
Peruvian donuts.
Si va a gustar, se va a chupar los dedos bien. Buenazo. Si quiere las usa como esposas. Please. Bueno, no problem, no problem. No hablo español. Bueno, ahí está. Picarón. Como Alvaro, ¿viste? Paso. Chupando los dedos, maestro, que cambie su capa. Change. Cambio rico. Señor jefe, picarón. Nos vemos, Tony Curtiza. Hasta la próxima.
So the video has another 5 minutes. I don't know if you want to keep it on watching. I'll give it up to you.
Los domingos,
It's not
la
gonna stop
plaza
it.
principal de Perú, Nebraska, suelen ser más
Well, everyone's laughing, so
tranquilos.
we'll keep watching the
Nos
video.
hemos hecho un trato. Ellos nos prestan al sheriff John McNorman para mejorar nuestra circulación regular. Y nosotros les prestamos a Perú Negro para mejorar su circulación sanguínea.
Well, I think we can stop the video there. This is just to give you an idea in terms of how we used our brand to go inside the country and to unite us all in order to create that platform and for that platform to be relevant. And that's why we received those high indices in terms of 98% of the Peruvians being willing to use the brand as part of their communicational campaign, to use it as part of their products, and to use it as part of their essence, as part of their platform. Once that was accomplished, because this was done in 2011, it took us 2 years to come up with the brand, from 2009 to 2011. One, we managed to do that within Peru, is that we decided to take, literally, the world by its foot. So what did? We did more or less the same situation. So I'm going to show you another video in terms of how Peru was portrayed in the major and biggest cities worldwide. If you can show the next video, please. No, video. Berlin, major event, world media recognition, Peru is the main sponsor. Germany, all the metro stations were branded by Peru. Even the major most representative buildings of Germany were branded in Peru. Opera House. UK London Station. Paris. Karl. Madrid. Canada. The US, Chicago. One of my personal favorites, Times Square. The whole of New York, at least Times Square, was beautiful and it keeps on going. We literally overtook the most cosmopolitan cities of the world, and we branded either an iconic place, an iconic building, or something that would stick to your mind. And we did this for a year. My personal favorite, and because we're obviously in Dubai, please the presentation, is that we overtook DXB. So for about a year, if you were arriving into the Dubai airport, the first thing that you would be popped into was welcoming to Peru, discover Peru. Literally, we took over almost all of the airport. Even your flight screens were branded with Peru. Why did we choose Dubai? Not just because of what Dubai represents. Actually, Dubai has just been branded amongst the top 25 most branded countries in the world, talking about the UAE. But because of what the platform of what Dubai Airport represents. From the 66 million passengers that have crossing Dubai, 18 million were part of the strategic markets that Peru has in terms of convincing them to travel to Peru. So for us, Dubai made all the sense. And as we say, whatever you need, you can find in Peru. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alvaro, for that enlightening presentation. If I may ask you one question while the momentum is there, would you say that Peru has been very successful in its branding because it already is famous for its landmarks, its natural heritage and cultural heritage? Does that make branding so much easier the world over?
I think that for us it's still work in progress. It's not that we have been very successful, it's not that we have been not successful. For us it's been a fact that it has been. And for us, of course, internally in Peru it has been massively successful because of the 98%. Something that we discovered when we were doing this soul searching experience is that although, as you correctly say, our culture is worldwide known, the Inca Empire is worldwide known, Machu Picchu is worldwide known, our gastronomy is worldwide known, there was still a lot of lack of information, especially on this part of the world. You know, from this part of the world into Asia, it was even greater soul searching experience, just because we didn't know them and they didn't know us. So from that perspective, with a difference, the brand has been a great success. Because just of putting a brand that at the end of the day is also the name of the country gave us a distinctive, added value perspective that we didn't have before. So now when you talk about Peru, the first thing that might come into your mind might be the logo, might be the brand, might be the ad, might be the fingertip. At least something is coming into your mind. And that was one of the bases that we wanted to have in order to create that brand. And I said, you know, we wanted to give Peruvians a platform. That's exactly what we accomplished when we gave them that brand.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mohammed Al-Kamali, can you tell us about the kind of branding you use for Dubai exports?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the ITC for having me in this panel discussion. And let me use this opportunity to congratulate you for the wonderful job that you did for Peru. I think before going further to your question, I would like to just mention a story which happened to me in one of the South American countries. We had a mission and I was really going to the airport, and when I arrived to that country, I saw Peru branding over there. So I was like, you know, bias, am I coming to the country which I was going to or to Peru? So even in Dubai airports, I think we've seen the massive branding that you guys have done already for the country. And I have to admit one thing before going further again to your question is that South America and their countries made a very good branding exercise for themselves for the past 3 years, including Peru and other countries as well. Which really, for example, in the UAE, we started to promote Dubai, for example, from an exports and investment perspective, we were able to interact as a result of a country branding exercise that happened to this part of the world. So congratulations again, and we are very proud to see that. And I think you set up an era where we need to work closely and share best practices. Going back to your question, which is about TPOs branding and how to export more closely. You know, first of all, we always see that there are, in more of the countries, that it depends on the structure of the TPO. There are TPO which is having a role of, for example, Peru, since we've seen the example of Peru, in tourism, investment, and export. While in some countries, you will see that there are only an interaction between investment and exports, and tourism is a side promoted. So in the case of Dubai Export, we are part of our own overall economic engine, which is based in Dubai, under the umbrella of the Department of Economic Development. So we have a sister agency who promote investment. We have a sister agency who promote SMEs. So we work in a chain, in a series of layers where we work closely, starting preparing those SMEs, take them through Dubai Exports, and then attract investment from the FDI perspective. So when it's come in our role to deal with our exporters, we are creating a channels. But you know, Dubai is really booming. Dubai is growing. Dubai is developed day by day, minute by minute. And we see a lot of companies setting up in Dubai. Other they are industrial companies or even services companies. First of all, we tried clearly to see how we are going to reach those people. So as a result of being under the Department of Economic Development, most of the companies, they have to issue their license. So it was easy for us to synchronize that methodology and be able to understand who are the exporters. And we started actually to communicate through a series of channels. However, now those series of channels were practical. It's like providing them with information about the export markets, trying to do a diagnosis on them, trying to do a DNAs on them, and etc. But recently, 3 years back, we've started also to shape up the strategy that we have from a marketing perspective and the way of how we reach to our exporters. Going back also to Dubai Export, we established in 2006, 2007, so we are still a young agency. So we require a lot of marketing activities in-house, first of all. And we need, first of all, to create an awareness also to our companies here based in Dubai. Because trade promotion and export promotion is still, let's say, for example, young. I will not say only in the UAE level, but also in the GCC overall. That's why you have seen there is a creation of other trade promotion organization in the GCC as well, which are going to drive that forward. So we have started closely working with our exporter in 2 ways, which is a practical way in terms of doing those exercises. But now we went to the way of how we create awareness using media channels that we have. So we started, instead of having those reports which we prepare, we started to do more of an infographics, collaborating with the newspaper over here. People started to understand our role of a trade promotion agency. So also we had an exercise where most of the TPOs has their own international offices. So one of the exercises which we implemented recently, and it was just 4 months ago, is to link electronically all the offices from all around the world to the headquarters in Dubai. So now even when we deal with our exporter, it's in an electronic manner. So you as an exporter doesn't need to see us anymore. What you will be doing, you will go to the website or speak to the consultant in our organization that you have and dealing with, or an account manager who work with you, and your request is going to go into a channels to reach international markets as well. So these are most of the practices that we have done. But I think when it's come to branding exercise, I always say there is a difference when you deal, because we deal with 2 segments. We deal with exporters and we deal with international buyers. Both of them require a different way of approach. Both of them require a different way of marketing materials that you need to spread them. So that's why what we do is usually, now I'm talking on the international level, is to understand those markets. I think most of us attended most of the sessions over here, and in one of the sessions, there was a talk about the trade barriers. In my own opinion, I feel now we don't need to talk more about those barriers, which is a trade barriers, customs barriers, etc. We need to look at the cultural barriers. That's why it was very important for us at Dubai Export, when we evaluated our customers in the international markets, to understand their culture. What exactly they do in their market. So we started to exercise through our offices currently, looking at, since we have our offices in Saudi Arabia, India, and Egypt, we started to diagnose the market over there. We started to look at the companies over there. And now we are working also closely on the solutions of how we work on them. So to sum up this point, I always see there are 2 types of, let's say for example, customer and approach that we need to approach, but we need to distinguish as a TPO on the way how we brand ourselves to our exporters or stakeholders with us, and to the international people that we deal with. If it's an investment, we call them investor, and if it's an export-based customers, will be more buyers.
Thank you very much. Now, Karl Hartleb, tell us what makes Advantage Australia the best TPO of the year?
This brings us already to a core issue for Austria. I think our best investment were to pay the Australians to change their name. Because even here on the panel I'm called Australia and we mentioned from Austria. So nation branding is an issue for Austria. I think I was really impressed, and I would have loved to be in Peru, Nebraska. Next time in Nebraska, I'm definitely going to have a look what happened in the long term. As Austrian, I think it's a little what you have insinuated with your question, what do you do is so known, do you need this nation branding thing? Austria is relatively late to a nation branding game. We have worked with Simon Arnold in the last 2 years, who, I think we are number 30 on his list or something. He did, I don't know, Peru, but he did Mexico and others. And we don't get anywhere really because the political process is not supporting it much, and we don't want to end up with a new logo and try to sell this in the world. So we as a TPO, we are doing something in that sense since the 70s. We have registered the Austrian A mark. It's something that we're going to see in a modernized version later. And as a TPO, in the last 10 years, what we have tried to develop is, since nation branding doesn't go anywhere, something that would emphasize what would actually assist Austrian firms to market them better on the global scale. And attach our image as the trade promotion organization. We are sort of in the envious position to be sort of a monopoly in that in Austria, to associate this very closely to this trademark and what the companies are doing. So to put this in practical terms is that we have modernized this Austrian A. We're going to see a sort of out of focus version of the Austrian A, and around that we have developed video and image video that we're going to show you. We have developed a whole toolkit of slogans, but also branding stuff that we are using in our trade promotion activities, be it trade shows or missions. But the idea is to basically sell it to the Austrian companies so that they use this as an umbrella in order to support their own marketing efforts. And this is something that is really crucial once you go overseas, in Australia and Austria. We try to distinguish that, and I think there are very good reasons to know what they're doing and what we are doing. And but what we're trying to do is to enlist the Austrian firms in our campaign to use the same slogans, to use the same image video in their own promotion. So basically we're trying, when they go in a business-to-business situation with people who don't know, we know that they're using this image. We know that they're using some of the slogans, the core strap lines that we have developed. And they're using some of the elements that we have developed for our organization. So we do a little bit of a crossover. It's not nation branding, but what we do is branding of the skills of Austria. So our main strapline is called Surprisingly Ingenious, which for us is the core of Austria's business. So we are innovative, we're very smart in applying things, we're creative in doing this. And this is something that the companies like to actually bought. It was not easy, but now they like it. They're standing, they're going themselves out in the markets with that. And so around that, we're able, with an expert community of about 50,000 companies that we service, to project this claim that we have to the Austrian economy beyond what we would do in a campaign like this, because this would be a nation branding effort, and I'm sure Austria wouldn't do it in that way, and we wouldn't afford it, or couldn't afford it in this way. So maybe we can have a look at this small video clip that I brought. We are just working on the update, so there's a year there that's 2011 that is been updated there. so at the end you have seen what I tried to explain, that we go from this Austrian A to the main strapline to our organization, so we tie actually the image that we try to create and support and communicate what are the main characteristics of the Austrian economy and businesses to our organization. That obviously, I think you have mentioned it out, you cannot communicate against what you're really doing. So you better be a good organization when you try to do that, because we work with Red Bull, for instance, in this movie on the communication strategies, and these are people that know what they're doing. And they're quite tough. And I have to say, in terms of TPO branding, for us, ITC and the global award that we got for the developed country, best DPO of the developed country category last time, was extremely worthwhile, because Austrian companies are picky. They pay us, we're a membership-based organization. And they like the idea that we are playing here in the group of the good TPOs in the world. And we are also quite, we're not hiding this fact. And so this ITC award here that was conveyed to us by our peers is something else that we're using branding, in particular in Austria, back home. But also Austrian firms are very proud of having an organization that is global, that supports them effectively, and that competes with the likes of Switzerland, France, and Germany, in that sense. So it's a situation where we push ourselves, and at the same time use our companies to convey the message that we have developed. We have another film developed, and the idea is, for instance, that these companies integrate themselves in these films, so they become part of these stories. In Austria, we have about 350 or so world leaders in some industry sectors, sometimes very narrow, but sometimes also quite important ones. And through the story of these firms, we try to also lift the rest of the SMEs, the planet platforms. And if you look at the global leader in hydroelectric power plants, an Austrian firm, Hartleb, but Androids can be a platform for SMEs in these particular sectors, and we try to enlist these firms to serve as this platform by using the elements that the same company is using, so we can have a big Austrian firm standing on our booth at the trade show, and we have very small companies standing next to each other. They talk to each other, they integrate, work together, but it also obviously, vis-a-vis the audience, there's a big boost with SMEs. They stand next to the world leader in hydroelectric power and use the same logos, same straplines, and these kind of things. So this is a thinking that we have in terms of TPO, what we do here. Obviously, the means are limited, and this is not a nation branding effort. If Austria ever comes to a sort of like Switzerland or others to really communicate effectively on a national level, we have to see how to tie all these activities into a national umbrella. We are a little skeptical in that sense with regards to Austria, because it's become a little more ineffective if the government is too much involved. But so we'll see. It's a discussion for the future.
Thank you very much. Helen Rankin, you work for CHAO. You are into branding and marketing. Can you share with us your perspective on how important is brand essence? Can you do some marketing successfully if you cannot identify the brand essence of a country or a product or a service?
It's a very good question. Firstly, I'd just like to say thank you for being here today. I'd like to thank Dubai Exports and ITC for organising it. It's been very well organised and very interesting and engaging for everybody. So thank you very much. Branding is essential, and it's very easy and it's very simple. I think working in the advertising industry, we like to overcomplicate things, but essentially branding is who you are, and you've seen in the videos and you've heard in what Mohammed has said here, it's not what you look like, it's not what you're telling people. Everybody here has represented something that you feel, it's a passion. We've seen that branding is actually, sorry if we can go to the first slide, in a moment I'm going to show you a video and it illustrates this essence, and Alvaro touched on it earlier. Branding is more about how you feel and how you make somebody feel. And in a moment you're going to see a video about how we as CHAO, we're a Korean company, we're part of the Samsung group of companies, and Korea and CHAO have this belief, which Alvaro mentioned earlier, is called Tuhon. And I actually first started working in Dubai 20 years ago. And even though there isn't an Arabic Arabic word that means Tuhon. It's something that when you see the video, you realise has existed in the UAE for a very long time. You asked Alvaro a question about whether having globally recognised landmarks was made your branding easier, and you mentioned there were still challenges. In Karl's video, you saw that those challenges were actually overcoming misconceptions. For those of us that are old enough to remember the Chicago Beach Hotel, I think one of the tipping points here was the construction of the Burj Al Arab. And what you should also realise is that the Dubai World Trade Center here, which is still my favourite landmark, was the tallest structure in this region for over 20 years. So people think that Dubai is just a superlative nation, and it's not. The vision for growth, wanting to be understood, to be forward thinkers, the culture that you have is very rich, and it's all based around storytelling. And this is the essence of branding. It's understanding who you are, understanding what your story is, and being able to use that story to unite your country, which Alvaro demonstrated in his video. And then you have these cultures and values, and you export them globally. So if we could show the first video, and you can see how Korea went from being one of the poorest nations in the 60s to being one of the globally recognized forces today. So you can see there that Tuhon for us is our brand. It's our mission, it's our values. And when we hear the word Tuhon, it's clear I'm not from Korea, so I apologize. I'll say we a lot. I work for a Korean company and it's very much in our everyday. So when we hear the word Tuhon, it's usually at 4 o'clock in the morning, and the deadline is normally 7 o'clock in the morning. But when we hear Tuhon, it invokes in us a feeling. It creates this passion. And this is what branding is. It's when you see something and it sparks something inside of you, and then it triggers an action. So if you think of a very simple example, if you imagine a doctor's coat, the doctor's white coat, you may think this isn't a brand, but actually when you see it, you feel reassured. And the action you take is that you trust the doctor and you share very personal information with them. So the doctor's white coat could be seen as a brand because it has this passion. When you smell coffee, this will also trigger a reaction. And we saw in Alvaro's video when they went to Nebraska, Peru, they didn't go and put up a poster and say, hey, come to Peru. They said, no, you have a right to understand and enjoy what it is to be Peruvian. And it's the sounds and the smells, and it's being part of this culture. So if we could just move to the next slide. What is branding? It's 4 things, and again, all the panelists have touched on this. It's clarity, it's consistency, collaboration. You will have noticed has come up with everybody. We need collaboration. Mohammed, you spoke about you being a new organisation and that you had to unify people internally with your marketing, and then you also have to do that within the organisation and within the country. We had the same example from Karl when he was talking about you have the large companies and you have the small companies all integrated and working together. And you saw it very much in the videos that we have from Alvaro, how they've taken everything and they've unified it. Going back to clarity, also like to go back to Alvaro's point where he said everybody in Peru wanted to be a footballer, and now they want to be a chef. You know, this is fantastic. This is something that you can do. I'd like to continue with the presentation, and what I'd really like to do is show you another video which comes at the end, because from today I'd like you to realise that you already have a brand, and you may not know it yet, but you already know who you are and you know where you want to go. And there's a couple of examples here of things that you can take home and actually start using straight away. So if we can move on to the next slide. This is just an idea of giving you what exactly is a brand. So for us, Cheo, we have the logo. This is what most people think. This would be like when you see my face. So when we see each other again, you think, ah, there's Helen. Or there's the crazy grey-haired lady that I saw at the conference. And that's just what I look like. But you'll think about what we spoke about here today, and you'll have a feeling and remember this point. Tuhon is a belief. That's a brand. So as Alvaro mentioned earlier, a logo isn't a brand. And it was the example you actually opened with between what's a brand and what has value to you. The scent, aroma. In Provence, lavender is known as the soul of Provence, and people go there, they travel to these fields and they have the scent of lavender, and it lingers with them. And we know this because they can't stop talking about it. Blogs, on TripAdvisor, on Instagram, and digital is where people are sharing these experiences because not everybody can travel. It's also an attitude. It might surprise you. I mean, being in Dubai, you'll understand that this is actually National Day is almost upon us, and when you see the parades at Imam Square in Dubai, you'll see that part of the biggest contingent there are the overseas Filipino workers, and their workforce, their attitude is one of their biggest exports that they have, and it's also a sound. The sound, I'd actually like to share with you a couple of figures. Excuse me, I'll just refer to my notes. This is Psy, Gangnam Style, teaching Britney Spears on the Ellen Show in America how to do Gangnam Style. K-pop is actually part of a bigger strategy that Korea had, and they've actually been investing in K-pop, in K-dramas for some time, and it's paying off. This Gangnam Style actually was the most viewed video in YouTube history. It's had more than 2 billion page views, and it's reported an estimated $8 million in 2012 alone. So this is a sound. It was created by the Korean government, much in the same way that Austria had to overcome and change these misconceptions about the country. Korea wanted to remind people that everybody in Korea is young, forward-thinking, we're very enigmatic, we're innovative, and they chose music as a way to do that. It's also rumoured that K-dramas, which is the next big thing, are so popular in Iran that actually mealtimes are orchestrated around the TV show. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it's a good story. If we can move on to the next slide. So I mentioned briefly about K-pop, and I just want to talk about this because it's something that you can do. It also illustrates what you can achieve with a big budget, and after this I'm going to show you what you can achieve with more modest budget. So the important thing here is to understand that branding is all about relationships, and anybody who's trying to be happily married will know relationships take care and attention and a lot of time. In 1994, the Korean government made a commitment and started to invest 1% into popular culture, exporting Korean popular culture overseas, music, dramas, and so on. 10 years later, it's now got a $1 billion investment fund purely for exporting K-pop and K-drama. And what's interesting here is one of the strategies that it's taken. It's targeting countries that are underdeveloped. There are countries that can't afford smartphones, but they have access to the internet and they have access to the TV. So the government in Korea is taking their tax dollars and they're using it to translate into languages from underdeveloped countries because they know that in 10 years these underdeveloped countries will be developed, and when they do come to buy smartphones, they will remember the Samsung devices from the show. So this is what you can do with a lot of time and a lot of money. So let's have a look at what happens when you don't have a lot of time and you don't have a lot On the next slide, you'll see three important things. And I'll be honest, I stole this from a group of individuals that have started community farming campaigns in South Africa. And they have these little sticks everywhere and they say the same thing. Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And if you forget everything else today, please remember this, because branding can start immediately. It doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be complicated. You already have a brand, because you already have culture, you already have rituals, you already have information that people know about you, and people are already talking about you online. You just need to Google yourself. I don't recommend for people, but Google your own country, and you'll see that those conversations are already happening. So it's time for you to jump into those conversations so you can make sure that people are getting the right information about who you are. I'd like to share with you an example. If we can move to the next slide. For most of you that have done any business training, you will have definitely seen this video. You will have most likely had this case study repeated a number of times, but I just wanted to use it here to illustrate a point. In the late 80s, this is in Seattle. This is a fish market, which is part of an open market, and the stall itself is probably about 3/4 the size of this stand. How does something that small in one place, in one tiny market, become world famous? Well, they came up with a simple idea. They got all the staff in the room and they said, what do you want to be? And one guy, he put his hand up and he said, I want to work for a company that's world famous. And everybody laughed at him. And then they thought about it for a moment and they thought, sure, why not? Why not be world famous? And they started putting it out. They didn't know how they were going to do it. Now that they are world famous, by the way, they're now tackling world peace. So I hope that they'll have as much success with that as they did with this. And there is a video here, but I'm not going to show it because it's quite long. If you get the opportunity, just Google on YouTube, Flying Fish Seattle, or Seattle Pike Place Fish Market. And essentially what happens here is that they created a show. So when you go to the fish market, it's in their blood. They get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, they do a 12-hour shift. They get people to try and catch the fish themselves. It's a whole interactive experience. There's 2 things I'd like you to take away from this. Well, 3. The first thing is they started with nothing and they created something out of nothing. The second thing is, in the last 10 years, they've had 10 million visitors a year. So over the 10 to 20 years that they've been working on this, their visitors, physical visitors, have increased. What's also interesting is that 20% of their sales is from online. So when you talk about branding, and Alvaro and I, we spoke about this a couple of days ago, we were talking about which is the best way to go, experiential or digital. And I would agree, there's nothing quite like, I mean, I'm having espresso with the tea and I'm feeling good about myself, but is it the same as sitting in Italy with my espresso and my ice cream? Possibly not. And you saw all the work that Peru did in taking over Times Square and taking over the airports, where they went to Peru and Nebraska. You can't do that on digital, but unfortunately not everybody can come to where you are. This is the reality of today. So digital can help. I just want to close on one video. If we can quickly go to the next slide, and then I'll skip through and go on to the video. Sorry, if you just go back one slide. Thank you. There's 2 things I want to mention here, one which Olga will probably enjoy. It's the ugly 5. Most people know of the big 5, the big game 5 in South Africa and Africa. But do you know that there's the ugly 5? So how do you take what people would call a weakness and make it into a strength? Another example I'd like to share with you here, this is Sao Paulo, Brazil. And in 2006, they introduced the Clean City Law. And what this did was it forced everybody to remove all the out-of-home advertising. All the branding in the streets in Sao Paulo has gone. The small shop owners can't advertise outside their shops, there's no huge billboards, it's all gone. Now for those of us that live in Dubai, and we just delivered the Samsung Super Selfie on the Sheikh Zayed Road, so it would be unthinkable for that to happen here in Dubai, but that's what they did. And residents and businesses, especially small businesses, were concerned before it happened that they would actually lose business. And actually what's happened is over 70% of residents and small businesses have seen an improvement in business. What's happened is is by removing all these hoardings, they've seen their architecture has now come alive. And the actual visitors that go to Sao Paulo now has changed. It used to be purely business central hub, and they're seeing a lot more outdoors cultural exhibitions. They're seeing a lot more street entertainment. They're seeing a lot more tourists. So it's very important not to try and copy what somebody else has done, but to go back and look at what you have and see how you can make the most of it. I'd like to end on one video, and I don't know if our friends from Costa Rica are in the audience today, but I had the privilege of working in Costa Rica, and there's one thing that you hear almost every second of every day, and it's Pura Vida. And it's not a slogan, it's not a tagline, it's a belief, it's the equivalent of our tuhon in Korea and Cheol. And what I'd like to show you now is a video on how two guys who started their own business used this platform of Pura Vida and turned it into a business, and they're now exporting globally. So it's a very good lesson, something you can take away for your SMEs, and then I'm done talking. If you could play the video, please.
Beginning only with Joaquin and I, it was funny because we wake up and we go to our place to sell, and our friends Paul and Griffin say, you can make for us 3,000 bracelet. No, that is not possible. It's 400 bracelet. Really? Yes. Okay, for 3 or 4 days, 24 hours, the resident that we can do, al mismo tiempo fue divertido. Pura Vida symbolized to me a good moment. Muchos más momentos, buenos momentos, because in Costa Rica you live many happy moments when you travel in our country. No sé, es el símbolo de una nación. Beautiful place, many people de Costa Rica, many people smiling. Pura Vida is 25 people, 25 families have a job full time. It's good because it's a job funny, it's a job, no, it's a stress.
Really, it's nice, it's great.
The people, the team of Pura Vida Bracelet feel free with the work.
Do you feel that they're going to work for every life?
I never thought the level, but you can see in the Facebook 30,000 personas like the Pura Vida Bracelet and growing. It's very exciting.
Thanks for that. Helen, I'd like to ask you, all these video productions that are slick, well produced, well crafted, very emotive, all the superlatives, but what if your country doesn't have that kind of big budget production capacity to sell the country to the world? What would you say the approach would be? Put something on the YouTube and hope it goes viral, create blogs, tweet, Facebook it, LinkedIn, etc. What do you think could be a possible option? High impact but low budget.
High impact, low budget. This is what digital is all about. I first started working here 20 years ago. I was responsible for the Microsoft Middle East website. We had to hire a guy to go around telling people what the internet was. And now we're at a a stage where we're permanently connected. We've put our phones aside, but normally we would be tweeting right now and sharing. The great thing about the internet today, and especially when we're talking about Generation Z in particular, is they're all about now. So they've moved on. They don't believe in this, you only live once, you're only young once. They're going to be young for 40 years. And everything for them they want to share now, they want to share experiences. What they share the most is genuine, authentic storytelling. And we see this, I manage brands like Coca-Cola, Samsung Electronics, and what we notice the most is that the posts, the videos, anything that shares furthest on digital is what we call user-generated content. It's those scabby type photographs that are slightly out of focus, but you can see the smile and the experience that's coming through. Everything that shares most effectively on digital, especially amongst this generation, are moments. They're all about moments, and these moments can be a fraction of a second. When you look at Snapchat, which is growing in popularity, you don't keep the image. You see it for maybe 3 seconds, but it's shared. So what I would say is that you don't have to have a big budget. What you have to have is a compelling story. And if you already, as I said before, you already have culture, you already have rituals. If you can translate this story in an authentic and genuine way, this will give you success. And it all comes down to one thing. It's asking yourself, who do you want to be? And I'm stealing this from Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he says this, he gives this inspiring speech to students and to bodybuilders. He says the same thing. It's important to look at who you want to be, not what, but who. And then you look at your brand as a person. You see these cultural values that you have, and you're able to export those in any different ways.
I remember a very impactful advertisement for Australia. I believe it was done in a low-budget manner. They advertised in the newspaper saying, come and maroon yourself on this island, and we pay you an average wage, and you tell us your experiences, and you tell the world. Can you recall that advert?
This is actually a really interesting case study. It started off as the best job in the world, and this was quite a few years ago. And I'll tell you a little bit about that, but where it is today, it's actually evolved, and it's now the best jobs in the world, and they use it to advertise their 12-month working visa program that they have. It started off as when you're trying to reach new markets, you have a choice. Do we go local or do we go global? Everybody has a budget. And the story goes, the myth goes in advertising that there's a group of people around the table looking at the budget and looking what the client wanted, a situation we've all been in before. And somebody flippantly said, for that kind of budget, all they can afford is a classified ad. And suddenly the light bulb went on. And so they started advertising as the greatest job. And they took small classified ads all over the world, and they relied heavily on social media. They created brand ambassadors out of the participants. You go on YouTube, some of them are amazing. Some of them are cringeworthy, you might not make it to the end. We had entrants make musicals in the street. We had people just standing there going, pick me. And this was a very good, affordable way to export their country. It was actually for Queensland. And they relied heavily on the individuals within the campaign to generate their own PR. So the idea was that you had to create your own video and upload it to YouTube. You had to use any means possible to try and get your video the highest awareness, and that meant coaxing and cajoling your local radio station, your national TV station, to try and cover your story. So they piggybacked, and PR is always a great way to express yourself and reach new markets when you have a limited budget. If you have a compelling story, and that story can be translated into news, you have a budget winner.
Early on, you raised the issue about culture and values. Would you say that it's easier to sell a country to a region or the rest of the world if you have similarities with cultural values? Because it would resonate? And then therein comes in the brand essence, etc., the emotive effect.
I think so. I think when you, we said that branding is about relationships and about people. When you see in your everyday life, you have a natural affinity. Mohammed mentioned it earlier that because of the Peru campaign, now that you're targeting these countries in South America, you're able to open a dialogue. We have this with Chile, with Korea. The advertising agency in this region is predominantly Lebanese dominated, and when it comes to advertising, it's very difficult to differentiate one agency from another. You know, we all pretty much do the same thing. We make it look good. So how do we differentiate ourselves? In the UAE, it's very simple. The minute we tell people we're Korean, they understand. Samsung Construction was involved in the BRIC, and we have these shared values. You know, the National Day is coming soon. You know, I always look forward to that. And Korea and the UAE, the modern UAE, it's about the same, 43, 44 years, and they have the same vision. We're all looking to the future, we're all innovative, and we're all excited to be forward-looking, but at the same time we respect our culture, we respect our heritage, and we look for ways to share that with people who come here. Dubai Culture at the moment is working on initiatives on how they can make people more aware of Dubai culture. Sheikh Mohammed Cultural Centre for Understanding. They laugh at me in the office, but every Ramadan, the clients get taken there for iftar. And it's very important for people who come here, that the population of locals here is very low. So you could come to Dubai, you could come to Abu Dhabi, you might not meet anybody from here and have a chance to actually chat with them. But you go somewhere like Sheikh Mohammed Cultural Centre, and you can sit down and you can share a meal with somebody who's born and grown up here, and you can ask them questions. How does it feel to grow up in a country with so many people from outside? I'm British, but I wasn't raised in the UK. Born in the UK either. I'm not really from anywhere in particular. So the great thing about that is that you belong everywhere because you're not really from anywhere. And the UK itself is the same. There are so many different cultures and nationalities there. How does this become your identity now? So I think the UAE is going through some very normal cultural challenges of themselves. I mean, especially because a lot of their heritage is shared, passed down through storytelling. So when you go to Europe, you have these amazing structures, you know, hundreds of years old, these castles and so on. You go to Peru and I grew up with a book of the wonders of the world, looking at these lines, thinking, how did it happen? And I was raised in Kuwait, so I'm familiar with this area, but when tourists come here, they think, there's not much to see in the UAE, it's just a tall building and the longest metro, and everything's bigger, but it's not. It's very rich in culture, it's very rich in tradition, and how do you get that story across is the challenge you're talking about. So when you're working on your culture, your country's culture, there are two important things to remember. The first thing is you have it. How do you tell people about it? And the second thing is what you already mentioned, Mohammed, is actually going outside of the country and seeing how people look at you. So those are the two things that we need to do.
Thank you very much. You have to leave, Karl, to catch your flight. Gentlemen, do you have any comments to make before we open up to the floor?
On the, let's say for example, the exercise which we do is going to be back. It is very important to understand that the way that you will package your destination. We've been, I think Dubai recently had a branding exercise to reshape the brand on the way of how to promote international and also to incorporate it and further it with the United Arab Emirates as well. We started to promote Dubai as a shopping festivals destination, and then we moved toward promote positioning Dubai as a city of gold. And then it goes to another layer as well, where there are also some drivers to that way. Emirates Airline, most of the construction companies, and etc. However, we did not forget the cultural aspects of our heritage of India, the way of how we take things further to international markets and try to package it in. So, but I still say as a TPO, still we need to look further on how we can collaborate in-house along with the tourism boards. And I think it's always easy when you have everything in one basket when it comes to tourism, investment, and also promotion. So I think what we need as a part of our recommendation of what we've started earlier, it is important to look at the branding exercise. Most of the TPOs, and this is a fact, say that tools of marketing that they use are exhibitions and issues. But I think we need to look beyond that. We need to look at how we could package our destination in a different way. Why I see South America as being successfully now rebranding and reshaping the world actually when it's come to branding. Now, you see now Argentinians promoting Argentina as a destination of honeymoon, also to change the perception of people. If you look at other parts of the world, Malaysia is promoting Ramadan as a destination. We here in Dubai promote Eid's celebration as a destination. So it depends also on the key messages that you would like to deliver over there. There are a lot of relationship between those three aspects when it's come to a destination: investment, trade, and also tourism. So the collaboration should happen on a local level, and that I think also from an international perspective we need to look on how we could build that, especially when it comes to the ITC as an umbrella of this all TPOs.
Thank you very much. Now we open this to the floor for Q&A. Do we have any questions? Any issues you want to raise? Yes, sir. Can we have the mic, please?
I would like to ask you a question to all of you, if somebody can answer. It's a question related to branding. For example, many countries in the world, they have, now there is a tendency in the world to deal with fragmentation. There is a fragmentation of international trade. So many companies are working not directly to sell to the consumers, but they are part of the global value chains, and they are supplying some of the activities in the value chains. Many countries in the world, they have maybe 80% of their export portfolio based on this type of industrial cooperation of, let's say, international cooperation through a new division of labor. The question is, how do you make a case in your branding for them?
Any of you like to take the question?
She's the master.
Branding guru.
I think it comes back to what Mohammed was saying earlier, the approach that Dubai exports have taken, in that they have a different conversation with two different sets of people. But underneath it all is the same brand, the same value that you have, the same belief. And I think the way to approach it is first to be clear on who you are and what you want, and the second thing is to be able to tailor that conversation to the relevant aspects of the supply chain. It goes also back to collaboration and having this invested for people to invest in your brand. It's about, if you can communicate clearly enough to this part of the supply chain, your brand and what it is, they will be able to translate that into terms in the next step. If somebody is only, moving into protest, but if somebody is only making a purchasing criteria based on the lowest cost, this is not developing a relationship. Because what if something goes wrong? If we're talking about just in time, the moment somebody creates a bottleneck in the process, it has a knock-on effect. So when you choose a supplier, when you're looking at the full supply chain, you're looking at reliability. Yes, the bottom line is very important, cost per unit is very important, but they also need reassurance and they need trust that everything's going to be delivered along the way. So the actual cost is not always the final purchasing criteria. And this comes from reassurance, it comes from a mutual understanding, and these will feelings and these will brand. So it does relate back to branding in the end. I don't know if maybe you've experienced any more specific details in your areas.
No, but something that might be a complement to what you were saying in terms of trying to reach the B2B or the B2C, something that we've done is that our brand has also been break down in sub-brands. And when I was doing my presentation, I said that we have different colors. So each color has been assigned for a specific sector. For example, if you talk about blue, it's going to be about seafood. If you're going to be talking about purple, it's going to be about fashion and home decor. If you talk about green, it's going to be about fresh produce or fruit and vegetables. So that way, if you come into the place of doing a branding campaign related to either B2B or B2C, the idea that we have or the vision that we have is as soon as you see the color, you're going to identify it specifically for one specific sector. And that will also come down to a breakdown with a specific slogan. As I said at the beginning, for us it's still a work in progress. The main idea, the main vision, the main platform has been already established. The essence is there. Now we're working on sub-brands that will help you get into those points that you were talking about.
Yes, sir.
I'm from Mauritius, and we have a sub-brand, Mauritius as a tourist destination, which represents less than 7% of GDP. That's what we are, but that's not who we are. It's becoming very difficult for us to promote who we are as a business destination. So even if you go to the boards in Europe or anywhere, you invite any of the CEOs to come down to Mauritius for business. And that gentleman goes to the board and says, listen, I'm going for a trip to Mauritius. People say, wow, this guy's going for holidays. Now, this sub-sector branding is so strong that it's not allowing Mauritius to emerge to who we are. And the lady rightly said, it's not what you are, but who you want to be. So how do you handle a situation where a sub-brand is so strong historically and doesn't reflect the truth about the country?
I think your point also touches on the same point that the gentleman before you asked, where you have these clashes that happen. And as you mentioned, it's when one sub-brand is overpowering or when one message is overpowering. And you saw in Karl's video that Austria had the same challenge. And it happens on different levels. The example that Mohammed gave in that, I remember the first Shopping Festival, and it's a layer, it's something that you start and you build upon. Geraldine asked Alvaro, these amazing landmarks that you have in Peru, did it help or did it hinder? And actually it's probably a bit of both, because as you've said, most people think of Mauritius as a destination, possibly a honeymoon destination. And how do you get somebody in the boardroom to take you seriously when you're planning a fact-finding mission to one of the most beautiful destinations on the planet? And I think what you need to do is just be honest with yourself and use it as a way to start a conversation. If I may ask, who are you? You said that it doesn't reflect who you are. How do you see yourself or Mauritius? So if I'm going to pop back to the office now and I'm going to convince my boss that we should open jail, okay? How am I going to start my conversation? What am I telling him? Why is it important for me to be there as a business? This will be my first question to you.
Mike.
Oh, if you're going to ask me a question, be prepared to keep talking.
Yeah, the financial services sector in Mauritius is twice as strong as the tourism industry. The manufacturing base is nearly 3 times stronger than that. investment is a huge component for Mauritius. If I were to tell somebody that the largest investment into India flows through Mauritius, or the largest investment into the whole of Africa goes through Mauritius, or we are the 10th largest investor into China. I mean, people will say this guy's joking anyway. So what I'm trying to say is the meat part of it, of the business, is really dominated by the bone part, which is the tourism. And how much can we grow tourism? All the beaches are taken over. So the gross prospect in that country is not from the tourism industry. It's something else.
I would say that you're most likely correct, but the reason why your tourism industry is successful is not just the location. Anybody can go for a restaurant, a meal in any restaurant, but you choose one over the other either because of the service or the food. Usually it's the service and the experience, and experience is the key here. So when you're targeting a B2B market, what experience is it? Look at it from the view. At the moment you're comparing all your other services to how tourism is currently operating for you. But go a bit further afield. How are your financial services comparing against the local countries? How are your business services comparing against others in your area? And these are your competitors. And once you can look at it from the customer's perspective, from the audience that you're targeting, what do they need? What experience do they value? And feed that into what you currently value and find some clarity. Because at the moment you're still describing products. If we look at financial services as a product, if we look at tourism as a product, you're still describing these products. But if I asked you to describe who you are, you're more than a product, you're something else. So if we look at Costa Rica, we look at Peru, this is something more about who you are.
Also, again, we go back here to a destination packaging. Now, if you look at most of the countries, most of the destination, all of them started to promote from a tourism perspective. Come to our country, enjoy the benefits of what we have, either hospitality, leisure, and etc. And that was really an era, back 30 years or 40 years, and etc. And this is what we know Mauritius with. I think capitalizing on your winning yesterday, I think here where you need to start. It is very important now to repackage the destination on the way of you spread out the key messages that focus on trade. We in trade promotion as a family under the ITC, we know each other and we know those facts what you mentioned about, and we will never laugh about it because they are in reality. But I feel it's also important now to go back and sit, and it's a branding exercise at the end of the day. We have the same in Dubai, and that's why we sit all together in order to reposition Dubai. But what we've started earlier, it was to spread out that message locally. How the people knows the brand of Dubai. And again, going back to the budgets constraint, etc., we started to put that in digital media. But we used, again, as you did, brand ambassador. So His Highness Sheikh Mohammed, the last Prime Minister of the UAE and the ruler of Dubai, was the first one to unveil that through his accounts on social media. So people started to interact with it. The second phase also was to go into the methods that people use to transport within the city. That's why now most of the car place number will be branded with this brand. So people will get to know it in the streets, people will get to know it in social media, and etc. And now there is also the different phase which goes further. It's how to take this into international. So I encourage you, and congratulations again for the winning. This is going to be the key. Going back home and saying no more tourism. This is what we go back as a trade promotion organization. There is a need to sit all together now and brainstorm and package the destination from a different perspective.
Thank you for your question, sir. I'm conscious that we are running over time, but just one more question from the gentleman at the back there.
So, my name is Hartleb, the CEO of Dubai Consultancy. Actually, I have a comment. This is my second day here. I enjoy this development for export. So one recommendation for future TPOs is to open it a little bit for certain sectors of private private sector. At 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, we will hear the winner of the next TPO. Whether it's Jamaica, Morocco, Tanzania, I think this private sector there, if we take, for example, Jamaica or Tanzania or Morocco, their agriculture side is very high. If they have certain meetings with certain TPOs, they will be able to export. So open it to private sector, I think it will add more toward the TPO.
Thank you, sir. We welcome your comments and we'll take that on board. I'm afraid we have to close right now, but I'm sure the panelists here will be happy to take your questions bilaterally right after this. Thank you once again to all the panelists for being here and for all of you for being here as part of the audience. And thank you also for your questions.